Hello and welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a moment once people have a chance to get their audio preferences settled. All right. Seems like a pretty good critical mass, and I'll make sure that I type this out for people that come a little bit later. But hello and welcome to today's webinar. Hope you're all having a smooth start to your semesters. Before we begin, hand it off to our presenter. I just wanted to cover a few technical details. If you haven't joined us for one of the ACRO webinars in the past, we use Zoom webinar, which is very similar, obviously, to Zoom meeting with a couple of key differences. The first is that, as you probably have noticed, your cameras and mics are disabled by default, so you don't have to worry about interrupting us. But if you do want to interact, you can use 3 ways basically to do so. If you have a comment or if you just want to discuss with each other, the chat is a great place to do that. Just make sure that you select everyone from the dropdown. Otherwise, only the hosts and panelists will see it. If you have a question that you want to see addressed by Dr. Tucker or by anybody else in the panel, then you can use the Q&A. And we do prefer if you use that for questions because it's much easier to manage. We're expecting probably around 100 to 120 people in here today, so could become substantial. And then finally, during certain segments of the session today, it might be easier for you to speak rather than to type out whatever your comment or question is. And if you would like to speak, you can use the hand raise function, and I will unmute you in the order that the hands were raised. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to our moderator, Sarah Kessler.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Kessler, Associate Registrar at the University of Georgia, and will be one of the moderators today. We're glad to have Dr. Melanie Tucker here with us today. She's a seasoned higher education professional currently serving Maryville College as the Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Students, and as the Chief Diversity Officer. She's a steadfast advocate for access and inclusion and has a passionate championship for individualized student success. Her webinar today is rewriting the narrative on imposter syndrome from stumbling block to secret power. As we know, navigating the global pandemic impacted women on a notable level, upending work-life integration, and some women face work loss while others saw magnified workloads. For those with caregiving responsibilities, pressure manifested itself through a constant need to be on with little or no support or relief. Mental and physical health plummeted. Though the end is not in sight, women remain optimistic. The Great Resignation and growing realization that some pre-COVID expectations no longer align with current COVID-informed functionalities provide a renewed opportunity for women to thrive professionally, while also managing imposter syndrome. This session will provide the opportunity to hear lessons learned from navigating imposter syndrome through crisis, discussing reframing imposter syndrome as a strength, and identifying next steps for shifting our stumbling blocks into our secret powers. Following the webinar, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. As Mike stated earlier, please post your questions in the Q&A function in Zoom. Melissa Manuel is the other moderator today, and she will be reading your questions from the Q&A function. And now I'd like to hand it over to our featured speaker.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate that. Where I am, it's afternoon, so good afternoon, everybody, or good day, wherever you are. It is certainly my privilege and pleasure to be able to spend some time with you today and to be able to address the idea of rewriting imposter syndrome from a stumbling block to a secret power. I want to talk a little bit about why imposter syndrome and why this is something that I'd focused on. And I thought it'd be important to share that my initial introduction to imposter syndrome related to work that I was initially doing when I got into higher education with first generation students. Really, the more I learned about imposter syndrome and how it could negatively impact student success, the more I thought that these descriptions sounded like me. I'm not a first generation student. I am the first in my family to earn a doctorate. I was one of the first of my peers to become a senior leader. And I'm the first of my family and friend group to adopt, particularly internationally. So combining these firsts in my world at times certainly felt isolated. I certainly felt alone, and really more often than not wasn't sure how to navigate sometimes, and that raised some insecurity for me, or feeling like an imposter at times when I was tasked with things that senior leaders get tasked with. Really having traveled what some would describe as an untraditional path into higher education broadly, and then really more specifically into senior leadership and administration, I really found myself at times feeling a bit inadequate, both professionally and personally, trying to navigate how to be the senior leader that I wanted to be. To be genuine, at times I felt like the tiniest misstep in how I was providing leadership or trying to uphold that role felt like it could result in catastrophic failure. When the pandemic hit, it was really an eye-opening experience for me as I turned to colleagues at other schools or here at the school that I serve. And as I found how many other women really felt the way that I felt, like I said, it was eye-opening for me to have that experience. I had thought maybe I was making excuses, or I just wasn't working hard enough or trying hard enough sometimes. And really through navigating that experience the past few years of the pandemic and navigating what I like to call work-life integration, the sudden and painful stop of how that had worked for me was really what opened the door to me to revisit this idea of imposter syndrome and how I might better put that to use in my professional life, and hopefully for some of you as well. For me, when the pandemic started, it was this combination of multiple things that felt out of control. And I'm a person as a leader who likes that false sense of control that I think we sometimes believe we have. Overnight it was balancing working from home. I have a daughter who I was trying to teach virtually online. At the same time, professionally, I became the COVID-19 coordinator for our campus community. I was also asked to chair our campus-wide COVID-19 work group. And at the same time, we had a new president come join our college. And so the culmination and combination of all those things in a very short period of time left me really deeply experiencing those feelings that you might associate with imposter syndrome: self-doubt, fear, worry, anxiety. I certainly felt like all of those emotions were crashing around me, and I still needed to hold a steady path to help lead our college. I can tell you candidly, at times I was scared. I was really scared about how to help steward the path. Yet professionally, I really felt like physically and psychologically, the health and well-being of our student body was weighing more heavy on my shoulders than perhaps any other time it had in my career. And I knew that despite, regardless, any inner critic I was listening to, any sense of inferiority or being an imposter, failure was not an option as a leader as we started to enter into the pandemic. So if we can move to the next slide. I share this quote because this is something that I looked to during those early months of the pandemic to really help push away that self-doubt when it started creeping in from that imposter syndrome. It resonated with me so much that it held a place of prominence in my home for a while when we were solely working from home. It's just a reminder that somebody was needing to do the hard work to help keep the college going. And I kept reminding myself it might as well be my team and I to do that. That was part of why we got into higher education to begin with, to help our students be successful. And so I just wanted to share this thought of she's powerful, not because she's scared, but because she went on so strongly despite the fear. I thought that might be a gentle reminder this afternoon for folks. It leads into the next quote on the next slide, which is one of my favorite descriptions of imposter syndrome. And this comes from the author Wilding, who stated, "Imposter syndrome is a hot mess of harmfulness." I share this because I repeatedly find this description useful to remember when I feel like I'm stuck in what imposter syndrome shows itself to be in my world, but also find it entertaining when I'm trying to get unstuck. I have taught the phrase hot mess to my 7-year-old, and so it's also entertaining when I hear that from her as well. My mentor once shared with me that part of our duty as senior leaders in higher education is to remove barriers for students so that they have a better ability to find their own individualized success. So I know when I am confident and focused, I translate part of my servant leadership role into seeking opportunities to lift what burdens I can off of students' shoulders so that they can focus on pursuing those academic and personal goals. However, I know that when I'm lacking a bit of confidence or feeling like that hot mess from imposter syndrome, I find that I tend to focus a bit more on that fear of failure, more so than the opportunities for success for our students. So this quote, just like the one before, helps me recenter when I feel like I'm getting pulled off track by aspects of imposter syndrome, and I hope that you might find them helpful today. What we're going to be able to do today is go through some, what I would call some lessons learned in trying to navigate rewriting that narrative of imposter syndrome. And there's a good amount of participants on the screen today, although I can't see you. I'm confident you are full of thoughtful ideas and comments. So I wanted to invite you to take advantage of the chat box and first share with me answers to some of the questions that are in front of you. So the first one is, and you can respond to any or all of these in the chat. We'll just go through for a bit and see what you all have to say. But first of all, how would you as participants define and describe imposter syndrome? So if you have thoughts for that, go ahead and take a moment and put that in the chat. Or if you would prefer to respond to how you experience it or how imposter syndrome shows up in your world. Since I can't see you all today, I really would just like to get a sense through reading the chat of how imposter syndrome is a component of your world or of the world of people around you. So you guys are amazing already in there. Self-doubt, not feeling good enough. Oh gosh, there was one that just went by that I really liked. Feeling like a dark passenger in a car with always sitting in the side seat driving like crazy. That is phenomenal. Not belonging, self-doubt, doubting abilities, not worthy. I really appreciate you all taking the time to add those into the chat. Doing presentations on Zoom is a whole different experience than doing it in person. And one of those is I think sometimes folks feel more comfortable to risk a little bit more and put self-disclosure in the chat. So I really appreciate you to do that.
There's a lot of ones on self-doubt, doubting your ability to do something, anxiety about your doubt. Really good. Second guessing your decisions. Paralyzed to act, also really good.
One that just, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just kind of reading some of them out, trying to see them all. They're really good answers. Feeling like no matter how much you have, it's never enough. And that crippling fear, I think. Yeah.
Like feeling like the only one without a cheat sheet.
Oh, I love that. I'm actually gonna write that one down.
I once had imposter syndrome about talking about imposter syndrome.
That's fantastic. Oh, this one that just came up said, despite your accomplishments, always feeling a bit like you fooled people. That one resonates with me as well.
Feeling like you don't belong, too scared to climb out of the box. I think it's just incredible that so many people have their own definitions for this and that so many people do feel this. So it's not something that you by yourself feel. So if anything, it's something that we can all see ourselves together.
So thank you all for jumping in there and adding your comments. I really appreciate that. For the moderators, if there's a way to get those comments, I sure would welcome that at the end. But I appreciate your all candor in sharing those with us today. I think, as one of the moderators said, experiencing imposter syndrome is something that a lot of people feel, but it's something we don't like to talk about, in part because I think sometimes we think we're not supposed to feel that way, or it's illuminating a gap. It's really taking a risk to say, as one of you said, like you feel like you're fooling people. To me, I look at it as imposter syndrome as like it acts as an alarm of sorts. To me, it's this idea of letting me and others know when they're out of their comfort zone. For me, one of the ways I have found, and some research shows, in navigating imposter syndrome, often it results in folks feeling the need to be like well prepared, perhaps even over prepared, but also curious, thoughtful, like looking for information to help feel like that piece of, to counterbalance that I fooled people, or I don't quite belong. I need to do more than others to feel like I do belong, or to earn my spot at the table sometimes. This idea of it that it's a trigger in some ways, or an alarm in some ways, to be outside of our comfort zone, I think is something that for me at least got really rocked in navigating the pandemic, because for me, in the roles I was asked to hold for the college, I was outside of my comfort zone all day, every day. I'm a solo parent, right? So trying to balance my child's need for schoolwork and leading college efforts in the midst of a presidential transition was something I'm not a scientist, like something we didn't know about. I happen to serve a highly residential campus, so just, these multiple competing priorities and how to do them with no information, and try to do them well and calm and thoughtfully. For me, over time, the reason I really came back to this idea of how do I reshape imposter syndrome to be a strength instead of a weakness or a negative in some way, it really was something that came to be through navigating that pandemic, and really in that first year. I'm someone who's a fan of lifelong learning. That's why I'm at a liberal arts institution. I'm also somebody that's always looking for silver linings. And what I found myself reflecting on through those first several months of the pandemic was, some days, in some regards, to be candid, what I felt like I finally had earned my spot, right? Like I finally felt like, even though I'm a senior leader, that I finally had the right to be at certain tables and speak on certain things. And I wanted a way to do something with that, because it felt good some days, but it also was weird. Like, why did I need that validation in some ways? And so what I really found in trying to reshape this idea of the imposter syndrome for me was that by shifting it from something that I sometimes thought was a negative or a distraction some way, to something that I use the term superpower, but something I could try to harness and be value added, helped me feel like I had control over a little bit of something over the midst of navigating what still feels like a crisis, and with the pandemic over the past few years. So through that process, anyhow, I've had the opportunity to write on it a little bit now. I think that's how I was asked to come and speak to you all today, and want to share some of the things I feel like came to light for me in that process, and really, again, invite you all to use that chat function. Well, we should have time for questions at the end. I should have started by saying, even though I can't see you right now, I know that you're there, and I'm appreciating your comments. And so I really would like to be able to engage in the interaction with information more than speaking at you. So I look forward to doing that. So let's go into that first lesson, which for me, I've really tied into reframing the fear of failure for opportunities for success. Doing such a reframe really harnesses the physiological components of fear into functional aspects, helps us make more focused, quicker decisions when needed. It also sustains our energies for longer term goals. Doing that, of course, is much easier said than done. For me, the fear of managing COVID on a highly residential campus early on, the fear of that was superseded by the opportunity that I knew that we had, which was to try to keep as many of our students here on campus safely, knowing that some of our students didn't have a more safe place to go. Some of our students that don't have permanent homes to go to when they're not here. And so while I was very afraid of what it could look like, or what it would look like to manage a residential component for our students on campus, I also understood if we didn't do that, a lot of our students would lose access to healthcare, would lose access to mental health services, would lose access to consistent meals. And so I really needed to focus on that end goal of the health and well-being for our student body versus the fear of the unknown of how to navigate that. Another example outside the pandemic that I'll share quite candidly is in writing my dissertation. So I pursued my doctorate a little bit later in life. I'm a person who went to school. Higher education is my second career. So I went to school thinking I was going to be a mental health counselor and did have a career in that for a number of years. But ultimately decided I wanted to try to help make a difference with folks who wanted to come and engage with things versus a lot of my mental health work had been through involuntary services. And so I knew that the things that I wanted to do in higher ed would likely require a doctorate degree. So I did that sort of as my second career pursuing that. Part of writing a dissertation, is knowing that you have to defend it at the end. And while I was defending my proposal for my dissertation, I was offered the opportunity to enter into my first vice presidency. And I was also deep into the international process of adopting my daughter. So I was pretty fearful of balancing and, becoming a vice president, becoming a mother, moving across the state, all while trying to write and then defend my dissertation. But I also knew that I had a president who was excited to have me join their campus community. And that president offered me a different salary range if my dissertation was done, to be quite candid. And so the balance of, I sure was afraid I wasn't going to be successful in defending my dissertation, even getting it done. I also knew that I wanted to have that done by the time I became a mother and started senior leadership. And so I use that as an example sometimes with some folks that are thinking about going on to get their doctorate, of that opportunity for success. We all talk about there's never a great time, but that was a way of the outcome and the potential positivity that came with it outweighed the fear of failure, and was something that I held on dearly to as I was writing my dissertation late at night. So I'd welcome some comments in the chat about examples any of you could share about how you have reframed that fear of failure and turned that into an opportunity or opportunities for success.
Erin had a really good one. She said it makes her a better professional because it motivates her to show up with her homework done as opposed to blathering on. So it again makes you better at your job, which I think is a really good outcome of that.
I appreciate that. All right, well, our next lesson ties to finding ways to incorporate your strengths. And so for me, I alluded to this in the first one about having a background in mental health. So pre-pandemic, my background was mental health, but also crisis management work. And so that's not necessarily something that you lead with when you are job seeking or becoming a senior leader, right? That I'm really good at crisis management, because often folks are hoping you're not navigating a bunch of crises. So for me, that background in crisis management became an asset to me as a leader in this process, quite candidly, because I've had a fair amount of experience in choosing that fight response versus the flight response. And what I really found early on in navigating the pandemic is that allowed me to be present in the moment and stay focused in the moment in the midst of all those competing dynamics. And that's not something I necessarily would have understood in the way I understand now before the pandemic. In some ways that I knew that crisis management was a strength for me, but like I said, I sort of felt like that was something other senior leaders were strong at too. And so I didn't necessarily consider it an asset, so to speak. But for me, like, to put that another way, remaining calm in the face of adversity is for sure something that I thought was, but now know is a strength for me. And part of that calmness in the face of fear really comes from navigating imposter syndrome. Somebody said in their earlier comments that imposter syndrome for them makes them want to stop, like not do any of this stuff. And for me, trying to overcome that sense of feeling like that it's something I have to do, but I'm not sure I can do it, and where do I fit in there, has has contributed to how I show up to do certain things, right? And so being able to harness that into a strength is something that I construe as an asset from imposter syndrome. For me, another way that this has shown up for me over the past few years is in how I approach being a mother. So having become a mother a little bit later in life and in raising a child of color who looks nothing like me, I knew going into it, and feel even more strongly now, that part of my role as a mom is being an advocate for her and helping her foster access and inclusion in ways that maybe not everyone around her is comfortable with. And so knowing that through part of navigating imposter syndrome, I've been in situations where I'm uncomfortable, but still need to find a way to use my voice. That has translated in how I mother in my life outside of work. And for sure in the pandemic, trying to balance that my daughter is Asian, and so navigating some of the anti-Asian sentiment that goes along with that is something, quite candidly, I would like not to be a strength, but had to rely on to help ensure that she had a space to be safe and thrive in. And knowing that translated into my professional world as well as something that I just had to embrace and incorporate into how we were navigating. So I would love to, I've already seen some comments pop up in the chat, but I'd love to look at some of the comments about ways that you all have incorporated your strengths into either overcoming or navigating imposter syndrome. There's one that says navigating overcompensation is a thing. As a woman, I can take on far too much to prove what I can do. So it's important to check in with other women who are also high performers. I love that.
There's a few on finding mentors to again see kind of where you're sitting, evidence of failure, evidence of strengths, reflecting on your performance, using your colleagues or your mentors to bounce ideas off of, navigating overcompensation. Yeah. Facing your fear, being comfortable facing your fear. Experience that comes with age. Oh, that's a beautiful one from Felicia. She has a quote on her desk that reads, "My daughter is watching me." That's how important my decisions are to help her remain calm and find the strength to carry on. I think that's beautiful.
I appreciate that, Felicia. That resonates pretty strongly with me too.
Be comfortable patting yourself on your back. I think that is important too. And I think women in general have a hard time doing that sometimes. Yeah, being open with peers and subordinates. Open door policy. And learning to accept praise. Keeping a journal to reflect on past successes or something to refer to. I think that's also really good.
I have to tell you all, this right now is the highlight of my day. If you ever have one of those days where you feel like all you've done is put out fires, that's how my day has been today. But listening to you all reaffirms why we need to talk about this and help each other find ways to move forward. So again, I just really appreciate your candor and your genuineness in the comments there. So keep them coming in, but we're going to move forward to the next lesson, which is listen to your intuition and instincts and speak up. This is probably one of the tougher areas for me when I feel like imposter syndrome has a tight hold on me. For me, it often turns into doubting that my instincts are true, or that my gut is true, so to speak. the way this showed up for me in navigating the pandemic is that it felt sometimes, and the reality is I think it's true, that it sometimes I really felt like the group I was leading or the services we were trying to provide could have life or death ramifications. And so the reality was, no matter how uncomfortable I or anybody else was in the moment, or how much I or others wanted to avoid a disagreement, sometimes that's what needed to be done in order to make a decision. For me and my colleagues, we had decided through the pandemic that we were going to prioritize the health and safety of our students. And so that was the driving factor, not necessarily what was the easiest or what was everyone else around us doing, but what could we do to help prioritize the health and safety for our campus community. So I really found through this idea of speaking up that I had to put the fear of disagreement to the side in some of those tough decision moments, and really not only facilitate conversations where people were disagreeing, but also speak up if I disagreed with where I thought things might be going. And one of my mentors shares with me the philosophy that if I'm going to fail, at least fail doing something I believe in. And that is something that I remind myself when I find myself in this conundrum of, should I speak up or not? Should I find a way to disagree or not? For me, another example of what this looked like about speaking up was really in this idea, maybe the second year of the pandemic. You know, as we early on in the pandemic used a phrase of like a post-COVID world, a return to normal. We for a while, folks in the media and the news were using this idea of when might we return to normal. And for me, I probably sooner than maybe some others, I really felt like I don't personally believe that we'll return to normal. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think depending on what generation you are, many of us have had some sort of event where we say like pre this and post that. Some of you for 9/11, that was experience how things have changed since 9/11. I think for our student body in particular, things in a post-COVID world, when that comes, will always be different than they were pre-COVID world. And so for me, I tried to find ways to start engaging in conversations where I knew most people really wanted the idea of let's return to normal. And I found I was trying to find ways to say that maybe there's a new normal or a different way that talking about what we've always done, particularly in higher ed, might not work anymore in a post-COVID world. So that's one of the examples that I can share about speaking up and trying to engage in a conversation that I knew at the start some people were hesitant about. But again, I felt like it was a responsibility for our student body. Part of navigating the pandemic was allowing folks to engage and access inclusion in ways that maybe they didn't before, particularly if they had online opportunities or hybrid approaches, and trying to foster space where people could engage in those conversations to acknowledge that different was okay was something I felt I needed to do for our students. So I've seen that a lot of chat comments have come in. You know, I'm going to ask for you to share if you have examples about where you took a risk and spoke up, even though it might have felt scary to you.
Melanie, we also have a question in the chat. What is the difference between imposter syndrome and the natural fears or concerns that come with being in a new situation?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. So I'll give you my best answer to what I think, and I'm sure some of you on this, some of you participating might have thoughts as well. So the difference between sort of natural fear in a new situation and imposter syndrome. For me, imposter syndrome is a bit more pervasive. So it might evidence itself in a new situation, a new environment. But if it's only in a new situation or new environment, it might not be imposter syndrome. It might be nerves or anxiety, or it might be somebody who is more introverted. I'm a person who is pretty introverted. Once I get to know you and I feel comfortable, then you would think I'm very extroverted, but day to day, I'm pretty quiet, pretty introverted person. Part of that is from navigating imposter syndrome for a long time. And part of that is simply because I'm wired to be an introvert. So for me, it's a really distinction. That imposter syndrome piece shows up in lots of spaces. I think it's maybe being quiet, even if you're not nervous just thinking your ideas maybe aren't good enough, or on the other side, right? Like somebody I said earlier, said doing all their homework, showing up prepared. Maybe you're very confident that you've done the work and you know what it is, and you might still not speak up because you think you shouldn't or haven't earned the right, or that your opinion might be lesser than other folks. So hopefully that, for me, that's how I would look at that distinction. And somebody else has shared, for her the difference is that it manifests in behaviors and repeating behavior patterns. Somebody else says it's about confidence in a new thing versus self-doubt or inner turmoil. Somebody here earlier said accepting that it's okay to be wrong rather than letting the fear of being wrong stop us from speaking up. And I appreciate that very much. All right, lesson 4. For me, it reads, acknowledge, accept, and embrace that perfection is not always an option. And so many of you in your comments have already touched on, like, part of how imposter syndrome shows up for you, or how you navigate it is in some essence being over prepared, having done your due diligence and homework and research to feel like you're prepared to do your best. And for me, part of how that plays out, I think, with people with imposter syndrome is striving for perfection or assuming there is perfect. Some of the tools that those of us that navigate imposter syndrome often use to try to balance it is doing research, reading, investigating, seeing what other people are doing, checking in with other folks. And in the pandemic, what we found, nobody else had gone through it either. So they didn't have folks, at least in that higher ed environment, didn't really have experts to look to outside of the scope of science, right? But the best practices piece that we often rely on, those weren't there. And that for me was really sort of the trigger, I would say, to allow me to say, there isn't one ideal way to do any of this. We all need to do our best, be thoughtful, and know that we're going to make the best decisions that we can in the time that we're making them. I think seeing other people that I respect, other people that I look up to, feel similarly and express a similar sentiment about we need to do the best that we can, helped me let go in that moment of a lot of that need to be perfect. And what I found, some of you said in your comments, imposter syndrome shows up in repeated behaviors over time. What I have found over the course of the pandemic is I didn't feel like I could be perfect at anything, and actually didn't even feel like I had the time to try to be perfect at anything. And since that's the world I've been living in for almost 2 years now, I'm hopeful that behavior pattern has broken itself, of knowing that, at least for me now, I feel like perfection is something feels like not the best use of my time to aspire to. Doing the best that I can in the time that I'm doing it, inspiring other people around me to do the best that they can, it feels like a better frame for me. And that piece of constant change was exacerbated by state guidance, federal guidance. And so knowing, like, some of us are at institutions where we put rules and policies in place and then have state guidance that has superseded federal guidance. And so pivot is probably my new least favorite word, because that's what we've had to do time and time again over the past years. And that also takes away even the idea of being perfect, because what might have seemed perfect yesterday, a week from now, might not even be an option for you. So again, into the chat of are there examples or thoughts from folks about how you have found ways to feel comfortable in doing the best that you can, even if it might not feel perfect or look perfect to you.
While we get those chats coming through, there was one question actually that I was curious to get your answer on. Do you ever keep quiet just because you think these people are crazy and I don't even want to get started debating with them?
You might have been in a meeting I was in earlier today. Yes. I tend not to use the word crazy, but I do sometimes, to be frank, what I do is I pick my battles sometimes, right? So at some point, one of the things I have learned both through navigating the pandemic, but also navigating being a mother is that time is a commodity, and to be my best at the things that matter the most to me, I can't give my all in every situation all of the time. So yes, I do sometimes choose to not speak up, even when I want to or feel moved to, and I try to look at it as the end goal. What's my end goal for whatever I'm navigating at that time? I appreciate that. That made me smile.
In response to your question, so a lot of the chats that are coming through are see the perfection in the imperfection, trying not to be perfect, just doing your best. A lot of the things that you said are just being reiterated, which are really great.
All right, well, I am keeping an eye on the time and know that we have one more lesson learned, so to speak, and then time for Q&A. So we'll move on to that last one, which is be genuine. And for me, when I think of being genuine, I think of it as being open, being present, being real. This is what I feel like might be one of the best lessons learned, so to speak, for me over the past 2 years, navigating the pandemic, this work-life interruption that occurred, being virtual for many opportunities, for me, quite candidly, allowed me to do my job better. And that has given me the strength and confidence to navigate some things differently. So how do I mean it made me do my job better? I was able to attend programs that were at night that were online that I couldn't have gone to in person before, because my child is 7, right? And so yeah, everyone here knows that I have a kiddo at home and I take her to lots of things, but I also can't go to every program every night for every student event, right? So for me, sometimes the virtual aspect was value added because I was able to log in and be present and engage in conversations and things that I had wanted to do but simply couldn't because of time. That also allowed folks to experience me and other members of our team in different ways, right? When you're logging into a meeting from home versus your office, if you're taking care of someone in the midst of that, I think for a lot of us, there was, I'm not sure the word, maybe a bit of a relaxing of what is professional. That's not what I mean, but right, when you're in your office, I kind of say putting on your armor for the day, right? Like how you dress and how you present yourself and how you interact in meetings. People have learned to do that different online. And for me, that allowed a better integration of my work-life aspects. And that has allowed me to feel more comfortable and more confident in who I am. I tell some people in my family, I live in a small town, I'm at a small college. And so I feel like no matter where I go, I'm always the dean, right? But I'm also always my kiddo's mom, and she doesn't see me as the dean. And some people don't see me here, obviously, as a mother. And so just for me, navigating the pandemic virtually in some aspects has allowed me to blend those in ways that I'm hopeful to continue when we can talk about a post-COVID world, simply because they've helped me feel more true in my shoes, more true to who I am day to day. So
Sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
We did have a question. So somebody added in, I have read that race and ethnicity may impact the degree to which or how often imposter syndrome is felt. And what role does your environment play in this?
Yeah, so a fair amount of research on imposter syndrome is situated within race and gender. And also, so in higher ed specifically, it has been situated with first generation students, which are often connected with earlier years were often connected with race. And so there is a fair amount out there that talks about that. So for me, part of my intro coming in was also, when I first read about imposter syndrome, I didn't think I could acknowledge that it felt like it resonated with me, because I didn't think I fit where it was centered at the time. Over time, for imposter syndrome has taken on a bit more with women more than men, which I think is part of why it was a topic for today. I think tied to also trying to navigate our space and place in the world, and earning the opportunity, getting granted the opportunity, the privilege to be in spaces and places that for decades we weren't invited to or welcomed at. So I'll move on to the next slide, because I want to make sure any of you that do have questions that we have time for that too. And I like this visual. To me, it's a nice visual reflection of how I feel imposter syndrome is experienced by folks. It's really that intersection of wanting to make things look easy and discounting the true value of our lived and our learned experiences. That's where I feel like imposter syndrome really stands out. You know, in the course of all this, if I could say there was one aha light bulb moment for me that went off to say, this is how I should definitely look at imposter syndrome, I'd love to share that, but I can't. There wasn't for me. It was certainly over a gradual understanding of, you know, I wasn't going to wake up one day and say like, oh, that doesn't apply to me anymore, or I don't feel that way anymore. It really was this gradual understanding that for any of us, for me, I feel like I could say, for, you know, regardless of gender, that every day I hope I'm showing my daughter, I hope I'm showing the people I work around, that what we can do is know that each day is a new day to make an opportunity in the lives of students. For me, that's how I frame it when I come to work. My calling is to help make a difference in the lives of students, and every day I have an opportunity to do that, and I can do my best. And some days I'll be better at it than others. But as long as I show up and do my best, that's how I can shift those fears and worries I have from imposter syndrome into a strength, is by knowing that I'm not going to get it right every day, and I'm going to stumble sometimes. None of us are perfect. We will make mistakes, but if I can show up and be present and do my best with the roles I've been privileged to be asked to serve in, that's how I can shift the negative part sometimes of imposter syndrome into strengths for me, because I'll show up as prepared as I can be. I will have done my due diligence as often as possible, and I will speak up based on those things to, again, try to help make a difference in the lives of students. So I hope that has resonated for you. It seems like in the chat, maybe it has, and I am happy to move us on to questions or comments, points to ponder, really anything to help us to feel like this was a good use of your time today. I know it takes an effort to sit and listen for an hour, so I really appreciate that, and happy to chat about any remaining questions or comments that you have.
One note from Megan that I thought was really good, it was a couple minutes ago, is her department has been using the phrase "have grace" a lot recently in ways to help conserve their thoughts and emotions as they deal with difficult situations. So I thought that was really nice. But there was another question. Can imposter syndrome be caused by a mentor or a leader?
I want to make sure I heard correctly. Can it be caused by a mentor or a leader?
Yes.
Oh, goodness. I will tell you my gut reaction to that, which is I think it can be exacerbated by a mentor or a leader. As I think about that, I might take a mentor out of that. I would say perhaps a leader. The way I look at the mentors in my world is mentors are my mentors are people who I believe want what's best for me, believe in me, that I respect, that are value added and positive, right? And so in my perspective, I'm not sure if I construed somebody a mentor, I don't know that I think that I would believe that they could cause that in me. But a leader isn't necessarily someone that I get to pick or choose, right? And a leader, a lead, depending on their leadership style, some leaders I think can take advantage of strengths or weaknesses that they see in their team members. So I feel comfortable saying that a leader could exacerbate or elevate concerns associated or behaviors associated with imposter syndrome, for sure. And then that's an interesting question. I need to think more about how I would navigate the next step on that. But I think a leader could exacerbate those, how that is evidenced or manifested in your world. Yes.
Great. I think some of the comments are also agreeing with that as well. Another question. So this is an anonymous attendee. Early in her career or his career, they had a micromanager as a supervisor. It seems like I experienced imposter syndrome significantly after that. Do you have any advice to help overcome that as you work with a new supervisor / become a supervisor yourself?
I appreciate that question a lot. So in no particular order, I would encourage you, if you working with this, if you have the opportunity with a supervisor that you trust and feel comfortable with, even processing through a previous experience, I think, and then that can help strengthen a supervisee relationship, because there's building some trust in there about risk taking, being genuine, putting some of that on the table, so to speak. If you don't currently have a strong supervisor relationship, or don't feel like you're comfortable or safe to do that, if you have a mentor or a sponsor, someone that you do trust and that might not have that supervisor relationship, again, processing through that prior experience. For me, sometimes it's thinking about, okay, I had this experience with a supervisor. I know I don't want to be like that in my supervisory capacity. And so thinking through, I have spent time with one of my mentors thinking through, I know I don't want to be a leader like that. So how do I navigate to become the leader I want to be, or lead in the way that I think would best serve my campus community, knowing some of the challenges or difficulties, or how I felt less than before.
Ooh, another really good question. What steps can a manager or supervisor take to help their staff overcome feelings of imposter syndrome?
One of the things that I think that you can do is in trying to foster a safe space for people to speak and engage in dialogue. And so ways that I try to do that are, saying up front, it's a safe space, that I like people to ask questions. If I'm having a meeting and I see over time that somebody consistently isn't speaking up, I try to find ways to invite them into the conversation. I try to, like, as a supervisor, one of the things I try to do is send out meeting agendas before meetings, so that sometimes people can better engage and be present if they know what might be talked about or what might be asked of them. And so I try to do that, so that also works for people that are introverted. It gives them an opportunity to do their homework, right? To think through what might be talked about, what they might want to say. Another trick that I use sometimes is if I have a team member anywhere that seems to dominate the conversation, finding ways to say to help that person see, like, that I want to hear from everybody. The way I try to build teams where I work is I don't want everyone on the team to be like me. I like people who are different thinkers and have different perspectives, that are willing to speak up and tell me no. And that takes time and trust to build that. So for me, it's those pieces of, like, facilitating a safe space, trying to find ways to engage people in the conversation and also keep a balance so that people are seeing more and more difference of opinions, different of perspectives, so they feel safe to speak up when they think their thoughts and ideas might be different than others.
Fantastic. Another question. So with the Great Resignation and reshuffle, somebody experienced imposter syndrome when applying for a job in the same industry and received a call for an interview. Any tips for overcoming anxiety associated with putting yourself out there?
Well, that is a great question. I've been pretty intrigued by this construct of the Great Resignation that some of my colleagues at other schools and I are seeing that in different ways. I think particularly in higher ed and even notably within student affairs, which is a large part of where I work. It's navigating the pandemic has burnt people out. And so one of the things that I've seen referenced a lot is it's kind of proactive and reactive, right? It's knowing that it's, for me, it's framing. If you don't get a job offer, it isn't because you did something wrong, right? It's this idea that if you become a finalist or you go through the interview process, that if you weren't the person that they picked to go into the position, reminding yourself that if they didn't want you on a team, you probably wouldn't have had a good experience there. And that is much easier to say when you are not in the midst of the process, right? But I think it's if you yourself are going through, have decided to resign or look for something else that's a different fit or a better fit. For me, it's really thinking about what is the experience you're wanting? What is it that you're hoping for? So that the risk of putting yourself out there feels like it has a good payoff for you in the end. That I think is a great question, and I don't feel like I have super strong answers for you right at the moment on that about putting yourself out there. Beyond the fact that it's, I will say, outside of imposter syndrome, research shows that women, way more often than men, tend to apply for positions where they believe they have like 99% of the job qualifications, where I'm not making assertions, I'm simply touching on research here, where men more often will apply for a job where maybe they meet half of the qualifications. And so I think there's also that piece of, if you're applying for something and you think you meet many of the qualifications, if not all that are listed there, you're likely a pretty strong competitor for that position. And my attitude's always been go for it. If you don't take the risk, you don't have opportunity for the reward. And so looking for what might be the next best thing for you and or your family or the life that you're hoping to have, it's always going to be a no if you don't put yourself out there to possibly get the yes. So I know we're nearly out of time. I always want to be respectful of that for folks. So I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today, for engaging so thoughtfully in the chat and your questions. I'm happy to answer the questions if they have. I can stay on, but I want to be respectful of people's time, knowing that you signed up for an hour.
Dr. Tucker, I just wanted to say on behalf of the Women's Caucus, thank you for joining us today. It's been very thought-provoking. We've enjoyed it and really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy, chaotic day, from what it sounds like, to join us today.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
And I did see a question asking about the recording. So this has been recorded, and you can actually use the same link you used for this live session to view the recording. It generally takes about 30 minutes or so to process on Zoom's end, but there's also an audio transcript at that point. It's done automatically, so it's not perfect. So acro might come out looking a little bit weird in the transcription, but it's otherwise pretty reliable.
And if I can just follow up with one last comment here. I'm Laura Remillard. I'm the chair of the Women's Caucus. And as Sarah and Melissa, we want to thank Melanie once again. And I know we talked about having a safe space and somebody to reach out to, and that's what the Women's Caucus really is. We encourage people to join our caucus because we care about one another. We know that this has been a very challenging 2 years, and we are there for one another. So come please join us. And whatever is said in those meetings, it doesn't go anywhere. We're here for one another. We need one another. And so once again, thank you very much.
All right, enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. And thanks again.